All right, so this is chapter 41. Mr. Wellington came into my bedroom just after daylight, dressed in his robe. I'd been awake since the birds sounded almost an hour before, enjoying the large, comfortable bed in one of his t-shirts. He had washed my clothes for me and set them at the foot of the bed. "Get dressed," he said. "We got to get an early start." He walked out, and I heard him in the kitchen pouring a cup of coffee. Coffee. I put on clean clothes and went into the living room to wait. Mr. Wellington came in with his coffee in one hand and a newspaper in the other. He held the paper out to me and nodded towards the pictures in it. There were pictures of the place along the road where I'd left Kit when he was sick. "This is where we need to go to get that gun?" "Yes, sir." "Well, let me get dressed. We'll be on our way." Half hour later, we were in Mr. Wellington's truck and headed to the Talladega National Forest. After a few minutes, he leaned over the seat and rolled down my window. The morning was cool and humid, and the wind felt good on my face. He took a cigar out of the glove box and stuck it in his mouth. As he chewed on it, I realized where the pleasant smell of the truck came from. "You got a fancy new truck." "Well, I'd rather have an old one." "Why don't you get an old one? You're rich." "Well, maybe I will." I looked over at him. He continued to stare at the road ahead. "It's a long way to get that gun, you know," I said. "How old do you think I am?" he asked. "Pretty old." Mr. Wellington laughed. "Well, I think we need to teach you some tact before we put you in front of a judge. All I asked for was to go to jail." "Well, that's because you don't know any better." I studied his face. "Pap never did like the law." "I gathered that." "All you do for a living is the law." "That's right. However, what I do is a lot different from what policemen and constables do. They enforce the law. I just explain it to people." "How about explaining it to me? How come Pap hated it?" "Well, the law is just the rules that most of the people in the country decide that everybody has to obey. There's people like your father who didn't like being told what to do. They don't like to obey the rules. How come?" "I don't know. People have different reasons." "How'd you learn what the rules are? I haven't meant to do anything wrong since Pap died, and people are chasing me all over." Mr. Wellington chuckled. "Well, I guess that's why you're so famous, Moon. Everybody wants to hear about how a child can be raised out there in that forest with no sense of the rules." We pulled over and got 6 sausage biscuits at a drive-through restaurant. I ate 2 of them before I spoke another word. "Now save some for lunch," Mr. Wellington said. He reached over and took the biscuit wrappers from me and stuffed them into a bag. He pulled the black box from under the seat, pressed a button on it, and set it on the dashboard. "Now I need you to tell me everything about what happened to you out there, Moon. I need you to start from the night you broke out of Pinson. You want to know how Kid got over the fence and how we got the bus?" "Everything." "This is not going to be an easy case to make." "What is that thing?" "Well, it's a tape recorder. You can talk to it, and it records everything that you say to it." "Talk to it?" "That's right." I started telling the tape recorder everything I could remember. Mr. Wellington kept his eyes on the highway. Sometimes he'd nod and sometimes he'd smile, but he never interrupted me. One time, he pulled over to the side of the road to look at a map. "Are you lost?" "No, keep talking." When I finally got to the part where he found me on the leash with Sanders, I stopped. Mr. Wellington reached in front of me and pressed another button. "That's quite a story," he said. "It's going to remember all that?" "It'll remember it." We pulled over next to where the tram road met the blacktop, and Mr. Wellington looked past me and out the windows. "This it?" "Yes, sir. About 5 miles or so up into those hills." Mr. Wellington got a small backpack out of the truck and put a camera, the rest of the biscuits, and 2 water bottles into it. "We got a good drinking water creek at the shelter," I said. He zipped the backpack and put it on, "Just in case," he replied. I shrugged, and the 2 of us started up the tram road. Mr. Wellington didn't walk fast, but he didn't need to stop and rest much either. Sometimes I'd get too far ahead of him and have to sit down and wait. Only once did he catch up to me and lean against a tree and take a sip of water. He screwed the top of the water bottle back on and wiped his eye with one finger and said, "I can't believe you dragged your friend all this way." I was scared. You get stronger and quicker when you're scared. "It's adrenaline," he said. That's what Pap called it. He said if I had enough adrenaline, I could whip anybody. He put the water bottle back in the pack and walked past me. "I wish you'd stop relying on that advice so much," he said. "Now, come on." It was noon by the time we made it to the shelter. I looked around and saw our fire pit, cold and rain-spattered in the center. Several strips of jerky were still hanging on my meat racks. A breeze licked at the treetops and made the place seem quiet and strange. Once again, I felt that the forest had forgotten about me. It seemed distant and untouchable. Mr. Wellington stood for a moment, his hands at his sides and his eyes looking over what Kit and I had lived in. Not much room in that thing, he said. It stays warm that way. He shook his head. How many ticks and redbugs do you bring out with you? Everybody sure does hate ticks and redbugs. Well, I'm no exception. They don't bother me so much. I climbed into the shelter and found the pistol in its hiding place underneath the marsh grass. I also saw the 2 deerskin hats we'd made, and I got those as well. When I crawled back out, I gave Mr. Wellington the pistol, and I put one of the hats on my head. He stared at me as I adjusted it. Man, they're going to convict you for sure with that thing on. I made them. I assumed you did. He looked at the pistol. And this is what you took from Sanders? Yes, sir. He took off the backpack. He unzipped it. And then he put the pistol inside and removed one of the water bottles. He straightened up and took 2 large gulps before handing the water over to me. Let's eat those biscuits, he said. After lunch, Mr. Wellington stood and stuffed the trash into his pocket. Okay, he said, now where's that log you shot? He walked to where I had shot the pistol at the rotten log, and Mr. Wellington took pictures of it. After he was done, he picked it up and broke off the ends so that he was left with only the middle section that I'd shot. He put this under his arm and tucked the camera away. Now, he said, take me to where you met with Sanders. I nodded and set out for a place on Deer Creek where Kit and I had trapped him. I had to keep stopping and waiting for Mr. Wellington to catch up as I ducked my way through the forest. Eventually, we came to the spot. The ground had aged and showed no sign of struggle, but Mr. Wellington took pictures anyway. So, this is where you trapped him? Yes, sir. And you hooked a log up to his feet and it dragged him into the water down there? That's right. He held on for a while, and that's when I took his pistol. And then he got pulled into the creek and floated away. Are you sure that's what happened? Yes, sir. I just find it hard to believe that you could pull off such a stunt, someone as big as Sanders and all. It doesn't matter how big they are, as long as you get the right trap rig. Very well, he said. We'll go with what you told me. Mr. Wellington took more pictures and studied the surrounding forest. Finally, he put his camera up and asked me if there was anything else I had forgotten to tell him. No, sir. I told you everything. Okay, then. I'll see what I can do with this.